Friendship is Grievous. A new world.
General Grievous endured the bumpy ride through the atmosphere in sullen silence, wishing that he had something else to kill. He seethed at the indignity of it all. He had not been able to halt the progress of the faithful. Instead of earning a glorious warrior's death on the field of battle, it had seemed he might instead meet some ignominious end in a hyperspace accident, or simply being cast adrift in the vacuum of space to rot, while the war went on around him. He had been spared such a fate by the surprising appearance of a planet's gravity well, which had forced the Star Destroyer back into real space. But things had simply gone from bad to worse, and the crippled ship was caught in the gravity of a nearby moon. With catastrophic damage to every one of its systems, it had failed to pull out, and Grievous had once again faced the humiliating prospect of abandoning the ship. The only possible bright spot was that what scans they were able to wrest from the Faithful's computer suggested that the planet he was heading for not only was life-bearing, but supported some kind of civilization. Of course, it could easily be one aligned to the Republic. Considering how miserably the rest of the day had gone, Grievous would not have been surprised. Or it could be some civilization of worthless primitives, possibly even unable to achieve space flight. Why not? His life had been cursed 1,000 times over already. He had had to endure the loss of his mate, his home, his pride, and even his very flesh and blood, bitter memories only serving to stir his rage. Grievous growled with impotent fury as the escape pod rattled and took on a fiery aura as the atmosphere strove to burn it to so many ashes on the wind. But the pod had been designed with just such circumstances in mind, and the cyborg held no fear that he and the droids packed in with him would fail to make it to the planet's surface. No, his thoughts were focused on what to do next. On the surface, Twilight Sparkle found herself immensely gratified to see that her calculations seemed to have been right on the money, as usual. The objects detached from the weird triangle thing had indeed flown straight for the atmosphere above her, creating an impromptu meteor shower as they burned. As they came closer, Twilight struggled to adjust her telescope's magnification to just the right size to get a better look at whatever was coming down to Equestria, but they were simply moving too fast for her to get a close-up look at them. On and on they plummeted, the light over the countryside getting brighter and brighter by the second. Twilight looked nervously up at the sky to see if there were any Pegasi about at this time of night, but thankfully she didn't spot any along the trajectory she was calculating for these things. Then, finally, as they were nearing the Earth, blue lights flashed along the bottom of each object, slowing their descent dramatically. "Must be some kind of engine," Twilight muttered to herself as she watched them descend the last little way. "Rocket, perhaps?" She checked again. No. The profile's all wrong. Something else, then. She wrote her observations into her notebook before adding it to the already packed saddlebags that made up her field kit. "Spike!" she called out into her home. "I'm going out. If I don't come back in a few hours, tell my friends and the princesses where I went." Okay," came the reply from wherever Spike had chosen to bed down. There was a pause. "Where are you going?" Twilight face-hoofed at her own negligence. "The Everfree. That's where the things came down." Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Of course it is. This is potentially our chance to study extraterrestrial phenomena for the first time. I'm not missing out on that." "Okay." Spike sounded unsure, but Twilight was already caught up in the thrills of discovery. With a flap of her wings, the Alicorn princess took to the air, soaring to where she had seen the first of the pods land. She rubbed her hooves together in greedy anticipation. "This is going to be great." Grievous stormed out of his escape pod in an angry huff. almost tearing the door off with the sheer force he used to open it. He leaped nimbly down onto the grassy ground, his cape fluttering in the breeze behind him. As what droids he had been able to cram into the space pod as himself made their own way down, Grievous took stock of his surroundings. He was in some sort of forest, which was plain enough to see. Not a particularly tall one, at least in comparison to the vast warshare trees on the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk, but at least decently sizable. His escape pod's autopilot had chosen to land him in a clearing, which was rapidly becoming rather noisy with the sounds of creatures, startled by his appearance and landing, fleeing in all directions. Grievous snorted with contempt. He'd rather one of them had attacked him, giving him something on which to vent his rage. At the moment, all he had were his lone Magna Guard and small group of commando droids clambering down after him, as well as the other droid groups in the nearby pods. To these he sent wordless instructions through the antenna on the side of his head, ordering them to converge on his location immediately. With an unknown planet ahead and no source of imminent reinforcements, it behooved the general to maximise safety in numbers. It was as Grievous was waiting for the remainder of his machines to arrive that his earlier wish was granted. Barging through the underbrush with the confidence of an apex predator, enraged at the disturbance of its territory, came an enormous brown-furred creature, the likes of which Grievous had never seen before. It had a feline face and a red mane, but also a pair of odd wings resembling those of a Minoc. In addition, its tail clearly resembled those found on insects rather than mammals. Between all this, the cyborg general could honestly say he had no idea what this thing was, in any real sense. But as it roared its challenge at the intruders, Grievous knew exactly what it wanted.
Back away!
He ordered his droids, who had been aiming their weapons at the creatures.
I shall deal with this beast myself!
Obediently, the machines backed away from their commander. Grievous undid his clasp and shed his black and red cape with a shrug of his shoulders, and reached down to his midsection to select a weapon. He chose his latest trophy, deciding that now was as good a time as any to get a feel for its individual properties in battle. The bronze blade that had once been Master Sadia's flickered to life, bathing the clearing in its light. Grievous held it high in a gesture of challenge. The manticore reacted as its instincts told it to, charging what it now perceived a would-be usurper of its territories and position. Teeth bared and claws fully extended, it took a flying leap at Grievous, meaning to bowl over the cyborg and tear him limb from limb. Grievous, his reflexes honed by countless practice duels with Count Dooku and real ones with hundreds of Jedi across the galaxy, easily sidestepped the beast's charge. He might have ended it there, with a swift cut along the manticore's neck, but he was in no mood to make things so quick. Instead, his lightsaber flicked out and cut the creature's scorpion-like tail from its body in a single stroke. The manticore roared its pain and, distracted by the burning, lost its footing and tumbled face first onto the forest floor. The creature's sheer momentum forced it onwards, rolling several long meters before it finally came to a stop. Driven to ignore the pain by rage and adrenaline, it scrambled back to its feet and looked at its enemy. Grievous simply stood there, waited, his arms wide open, as if daring the monster to come around for another try. Its fury overcoming its survival instincts, the manticore did just that. Once again, primal challenge behaviour dictated its attack, and it hurled through the air once more at the cyborg general. Grievous deactivated the lightsaber, his two arms splitting once more into four, and met the creature's charge head on. The manticore pounced, claws out and mouth open wide. Two of Grievous' arms shot out to grip the beast's ankles, the other two latching onto its chest. Grievous' talons dug deep into the earth below, and somehow, impossibly, he stopped the multi-ton behemoth dead in its tracks. It roared and snapped with its vicious fangs, trying to break the cyborg's grip with its flailing. But that did the monster no good, for Grievous was far stronger than his body's thin metal limbs suggested. Spitting out a primal cry of his own, Grievous hoisted a flailing manticore above his own head. It struggled, beating its wings hard in a desperate attempt to get free. but that helped not at all. Grievous flung the beast with all 4 arms at the nearest tree, head first. The impact cracked both tree and bone, and the manticore slumped to the ground. Before it had a chance to recover, Grievous reactivated the lightsaber and took a powerful leap through the air. As he came down on top of it, 2 hands thrust the blade through the manticore's chest. The beast flailed and thrashed wildly in its death throes, its claws scraping its killer many times through pure chance. They did little more than scratch the surface of duranium armor plating on the cyborg, who took it stoically. At last, the beast twitched its last and lay still. Grievous pulled the lightsaber from its corpse with a satisfied grunt. He always felt better after he had killed something. In a burst of audible binary, the language of machines, Grievous's one remaining Magna Guard alerted him to the presence of another creature in this clearing, one that had neither fled from him in terror nor attempted to attack him as the larger beast had. Grievous's head jerked in the indicated direction, and the creature he saw looked like nothing so much as a small, purple, winged horse. Twilight Sparkle stood frozen in place, held there by awe and terror. It was one thing to imagine contact with aliens for the first time. It was a whole nother thing to gaze upon a group of metal terrors. The mechanical-looking aliens stood on 2 legs and had 2 arms, like her human friends in another dimension. But that was about where the similarities ended. They were tall and intimidating, with broad chests, thin limbs, and no fur or clothing or even skin that she could see. The eyes of the black ones were a sterile white, while the grey one had 2 red eyes on its head and what looked like a larger third eye in the centre of its chest. None had any pupils, and they were so still as to bring into question whether they were even alive or not. And then there was their apparent leader. An enormous horror of what looked to be bone-white armour interspersed with darker gaps, it towered above the rest. Twilight had arrived just in time to watch it get charged by a fully grown manticore male, and then lift the beast over its head without even using magic. She had watched the alien toss it like a rag doll, and then put what looked to be a magical sword straight through its entire body without noticeable strain. She had seen many intimidating sights in her time, but she had never watched anything kill another creature quite so easily or so unhesitatingly. She swallowed. Maybe coming immediately and alone hadn't been such a good idea after all. Maybe the alien was angry about its apparent crash landing. She hoped that's all it was. She really hoped that. Then, the grey alien with 3 red eyes blurted out something she couldn't understand, but the finger pointing her way was clear enough. The alien leader turned to look at her, and she caught a glimpse of its face for the first time. Most everything about it was the same feature bone-white metal, but its eyes weren't like the others. They looked organic, surrounded by red flesh in carved-out areas of the armour. The eyes themselves were a deep yellow, with black reptilian slits for pupils. They stared at her, and she got the feeling of being directly in the sights of some enormous monster, evaluating whether or not to eat her whole. Twilight shuddered visibly. She did not like those eyes. The alien put its arms behind its back and started towards her.